Good morning. My name is James Bell. I'm a 49-year resident of this community, and I was a 38-year employee at Placentia Yorba Linda Unified School District. 22 of those years, I taught social science, primarily history. 8 years, I was the assistant principal of curriculum and instruction, and some consider me to be the architect of our highly regarded IB and ValTech programs. And then the final 8 years of my career, I was the principal at Valencia High School. I'm here today to talk to you about two fairly controversial issues in our community that may or may not affect the upcoming election. And I'm referring to CRT and parental rights. First of all, CRT, critical race theory. I want to try to explain to you what it is and what it isn't. First of all, critical race theory was a movement after the Civil War, and it became formalized in the 1970s. Now, I want you to keep in mind, I'm a history major, and I taught history for 22 years, and I never even heard of CRT until about 3 years ago. And if you ever take the time to read the document, you'll find out it's written at a very, very high level, not for the consumption of high school students. About the only place that you'll get exposure to true CRT as a discipline is in law school or maybe in a doctoral program in history. But nevertheless, what CRT is basically it is defined as interrogation of racism and race. And if you look up a synonym for interrogation, it means a probe or to look at it closely. The primary premise of CRT is that racism is embedded in many of our institutions, whether it be our judicial system, our education system, our healthcare system, or our economic system. What CRT, and oh, by the way, it's almost impossible to teach history, US history, without at least touching on racism. How can you go ahead and teach slavery, Jim Crow laws, the near genocide of our indigenous population, Chinese exclusionary acts, the detention of Japanese American citizens during World War II, without at least dabbling in racism? Even if the teacher chooses to avoid the subject, the students will not. Many of you don't give these students credit enough. They're much more intellectual and perceptive and curious. And if the teacher doesn't raise the question, I'll guarantee you the students don't raise the question. What concerns me, if we go ahead and start eliminating a discussion of any of these topics in our school, we really are rewriting history. Some people might call it revisionism. I call it censorship. And that's the kind of stuff that they do in North Korea and Red China and Russia. And I really don't want to see it in our community or certainly in our country. And I'll leave you with this. I want you to think about it. How can you possibly understand the present if you don't study the true past? How can you intervene in the future if we don't truly study the past? Now, about CRT. First of all, we've never taught CRT in our school district. Like I said, I was a teacher for 22 years. I was in charge of curriculum for another 8 years and a principal for 8 years. We never taught CRT. We didn't even know what CRT is. No one knew what CRT is or was until about 3 or 4 years ago when certain sectors of our nation they brought it to the forefront. So here we are, we're establishing a policy for a problem that doesn't exist. And it has actually created some problems. For an example, once the policy was established, is Cal State Fullerton paused their contract with us for student teachers. And so student teachers from Cal State Fullerton can no longer do their student teaching in PYL. And the district goes ahead and says, well, it's no big deal because we have contracts with 28 other school districts. Yeah, I've built those contracts. I've been party to those contracts. And we have contracts with some schools where we might get one student teacher every 5 years. So that's sort of a meaningless statistic. Basically, about 60 to 70% of the teachers in PYL are graduates of Cal State Fullerton, and we're losing them. Uh, we're losing them and losing access to their talent because of this one policy. You need to understand also that when we passed this policy, it applied to all kids. And then some board members were made aware that if you pass this policy, we're going to be decertified by both the College Board, who administers advanced placement, and by the International Baccalaureate Organization, which administers IB. Now, how does that affect our kids? Well, about 25% of our high school kids have aspirations of matriculating to the UC system or a comparable private school. And if all of a sudden they're deprived access to AP and IB classes, they have no chance. They have no chance of getting into those schools. Now, if you figure 25%, we have 8,000 students in our 4 high schools. That's about 2,000 kids. And I don't think it's far out to go ahead and think those 2,000 kids that want to get into a great college are going to leave our district and go to Oxford Academy or Troy or Sunny Hills or Canyon to assure their pathway to their future. So what did our district do? Well, now we have a 2-tier policy. If you're in an AP or IB class, you can be exposed to CRT concepts. But all the other students they cannot be. And you talk about a silly, ridiculous policy. Also, I think it's important to point out during the discussion of this policy, and we're the only school district in all of Orange County that has this policy, but during the discussion, 3 assistant superintendents advised against it. May I add, all 3 of them are no longer with us. 2 of them were fired, and 1 left because they felt they had no choice ethically and morally. But also, it went against council advice. The lawyers of the district advised against it. I find it interesting that, okay, we've got this new policy, but the curriculum hasn't changed in the least. We're still teaching to the same framework. We're still teaching the exact same subject, which leads me to believe, why did we pass the policy when we haven't changed anything? There's been no in-service of teachers. There's been no dictates passed down. Everything's the same, but this new policy that has proven to be destructive to our school district. I think it's a perfect example of the politicization of our school district, is we brought politics into our school district and we have lost sight of why we're here. And that's going to go ahead, that's to teach our kids. Also, it's divided our community, and it's driven a wedge between the parents and the schools, one that shouldn't exist. Keep in mind, how much time does your kid spend at school? I'm guessing they spend a lot more time at school than they do with you. And so why would you want to go ahead and vilify the schools and vilify the teachers for something like this? Now, the other topic is parental choice. And I'm going to lead off with this simple question. They passed this policy last school year. Can any of you tell me what parental right do you have now that you did not have prior to the passage of this policy? And I'm guessing that none of you can answer that question, because guess what? You don't have any other rights. Basically, what the policy is the schools are now obligated within 24 hours to contact a parent if the safety, welfare, or health of your child is in any way jeopardized. Well, guess what? We've been doing that for 50 years. When I was in principal, I insisted that we go ahead and contact parents. If anything, at this point, the district, instead of spending money on silly vanity projects, they could be expending more money for the counselors. The American Schools Counselor Association recommends one counselor for every 250 kids. The state of California averages throughout all their high schools one counselor for every 464 kids. Placentia Unified, we average over 500. If anything, we should be expending our money there so we can have better counseling and more counseling for our kids. But you know what? The elephant in the room, and we hear a lot about it, is gender identification. And first of all, you need to understand that is so rare. Some people want to make it sound like it's just running rampant through our country and on our campuses. I talked to one close friend. She's been a counselor for over 30 years. And she recently told me in all her career, she's dealt with one such case. I'll guarantee you is we deal with a lot more cases of unsafe environments at home, whether it be abuse or whatever it may be. So here again, we're establishing a policy for a problem that doesn't exist. Now, you may differ with this, and it's really irrelevant because Gavin Newsom passed a law recently, or legislature in California in July, saying that the schools and the counselors do indeed have the right to withhold that information from parents if they feel the child's safety is at risk. Now, I know all of you people are wonderful parents. You love your kids, you care about your kids, you want to protect your kids, and you have great lines of communication with your kids. Okay? What I'm saying here is if all of that is true, if you have great lines of communication, the family, the parents, are the first to know if there's any type of gender identity crisis going on with the kids, not the schools. Now, I'll also add, all parents are not good parents. And some kids are scared to death to go ahead and talk about this subject to their parents. Don't lose sight. Parents have rights, so do children. And we have a responsibility in the state of California to protect those children. If all parents were good parents, why would we even have such a thing as child protective services? So in closing, a couple things I just want to mention. We have created two controversial policies, and we're the news of the county. We're the news of Southern California. But we created these policies for problems that do not exist. They've served to divide our community. They have served to drive a wedge between parents and schools. They've created fear and apprehension among most school employees. And all of that has been unnecessary. I contend that it has been little more than political grandstanding or political theater. And it's time that we go ahead and get rid of the chaos and get rid of the distrust. And it's time we return to normalcy and focus on what we should be doing in our community, and that is educating our kids. Thank you very much.